We have to ask ourselves this question: how are major companies outbeating all their other competitors? Samsung phones are a great example. They're outselling their competitors by nearly 50 million units. In the third quarter of 2015, Samsung sold 102 million phones compared to Apple and other competitors, which were hovering around 25 to 50 million units. And there's an explanation for this, and this is called the Ziff law, where the top competitor outbeats everyone else by a landslide, where every other competitor hovers around the average. So, in this podcast and video, instead of talking about what these number one companies do that makes them stand out, I want to talk about what they do in terms of quitting that makes all the difference for them. And this is where Seth Godin's book, The Dip, talks about this transition period. And we all go through this dip or this curve. We initially have a starting goal like losing weight or learning how to snowboard, and we go through this honeymoon period where everything's exciting and everything's fun. But then you hit this stretch where you're putting in the work and there's no reward coming from it, and you start to lose that honeymoon feeling. And the biggest mistake that people make is not quitting when they should and quitting when they know they should have kept pushing forward. In Seth Godin's book, he talks about three different types of curves that we all are on. And the first one is the cliff, where you're going off this abrupt quote unquote cliff. I've never smoked before, but smoking is a great example of this cliff curve where you're constantly needing more and more cigarettes to get this sense of high until you hit this point where you're about to quote unquote fall off this cliff. And in this case, you might get some sort of serious disease, right? So, and the second example here is the cul-de-sac curve. And, when I was little, I remember I used to play Tomb Raider on my Game Boy. And when I first got the game, I used to play that game in one sitting and play all the levels. But instead of buying another game to keep challenging me as a gamer, I kept playing the same levels over and over again. And what this made me do was it made me very comfortable. It made me have this false sense of confidence. And this is an example of a cul-de-sac curve where you grow stagnant. It's almost like a dead-end job type of thing, and you grow comfortable. And the last curve is the dip, and this is where you all want to be. And again, going back to the example of snowboarding, you when you first start out snowboarding, you have this sense of excitement. The excitement of going down a hill fast or doing all these really cool tricks. But as soon as you get on top of that mountain and you start riding down, you quickly realize how painful the ride down is. You keep falling, your butt is wet, and the people are watching you constantly fall over and over again. And this is where the dip lies. And this is where you have to make that decision of whether you want to keep going up the mountain again and accept falling 100 times before getting good, or failing or just quitting and accepting your defeat and move on to something else. See, the dip here is designed to weed out those who are curious versus serious about something. And that's what's really cool about this dip curve. The problem is that most of us are on this cul-de-sac or the cliff curve. And the reason for this is because most people are afraid to quit. And let's face it, because quitting means that we need to acknowledge that we aren't going to succeed at something, or we're not going to be the best. We have this idea in our minds that we're not good enough, so we're going to keep pursuing something that isn't going to give us anything. And so what happens for those people who don't quit or are afraid to quit? What happens is that they settle for average. For an average snowboarder who buys all this expensive gear, instead of going to the slopes every year, they're going once a year on these bunny slopes. Or for the average student who only works through the book problems that are easy instead of working through the difficult ones. Or the average salesman who gives up after 3 meetings with an initial client, where even though statistically you need to be going to these clients 5 to 7 times before you can close any sort of deal. You might be asking yourself now, like, Herschel, how should I decide if I should quit or keep persisting? And these are the type of questions I would be asking. And Seth Godin said them perfectly. And the first one is, am I panicking? When you have a massive failure, whether it's getting a test back and you failed it or you're falling on your face while snowboarding, in the moment, you're high on emotions, and those emotions are telling you to quit. So step back for a moment and let those initial emotions kind of drift away before deciding if you want to quit. And the second question is, who am I trying to influence? Are you trying to influence one person or are you trying to influence a large group of people? Because if you're trying to influence one person and you've used the same tactic 12 times and it's not working, I think it's time to quit on that tactic and kind of try a different way. But if you're trying to influence a large group of people, see, like this is different because now every iteration that you put out there to influence these group of people, you're constantly improving on your craft and your tactics. So I would suggest when you're trying to influence a large group of people to keep persisting, to keep going forward and not quitting. And the last question is, what sort of measurable progress am I having? It's a great mindset to have where you know there's going to be a light at the end of the tunnel, which is great. It's great for your mental health. It's great for motivation also. But along the way, when you're in this tunnel where you can't see anything, you need to see progress at least. You need to have checkpoints along the way to see that you're meeting your goals or not. So a good example is if you're going snowboarding, measuring your progress of, okay, I fell down 5 times and that's two less than the last time I was down the slope. That's progress. In the art of being mindful, sometimes we need to swallow up our pride and ego because it gets in the way a lot of times, and take a good look at our hobbies, our activities, the projects that we're working on, and switch our questioning from how can I keep going forward to should I quit and try a different way.